In today's Farm Report, technology can help us in many ways in diagnosing animals on the farm. But, as Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office points out, the most accurate way is still to look, listen, and feel.
I think in our era of computers and smartphones and data and more data, we often get wrapped up in trying to analyze everything through data. And I'm as guilty as anything because it's real easy for me to get somebody's DHI records and download them and try to speculate what the issue is. But sometimes I find out it's probably better for me to just get out in the farm and walk around and look around and see what's happening. I would encourage everyone that's out there, if you're a producer, to just go out, and sometimes that's a good place to start when you're troubleshooting an issue, is just to stand back. And that's sometimes hard when you're the owner of the business because you see what you see every single day, and so you don't recognize when things begin to change. But the three things I would encourage you to do is to just look, listen, and feel. So look around, look at are everything clean like it should be? I'll use housing as an example in my examples here, but I think it could work for a lot of things. Look at your animals in your housing. Are your animals clean? Does it look like they have enough bedding? Does it look like they have nice hair coats? Does it look like they're, if you've got calf housing, are they doing normal calf play behavior? And if they're not, then there's probably something maybe that you should check a little bit further. I think it's important to listen. Again, when you're listening in your barn, listen for cows banging against stalls if you've got free stalls. If you're in calf housing or cow housing, listen to any animals that might be coughing or breathing. You're going to have some of that, but does it sound like an unusually high number? Another thing is just feel your stalls. Make sure you can feel the air. Are you getting too much draft in your calf housing? Are there areas of the barn that are a lot colder than other areas of the barn? So I think just by using your senses and by listening and feeling can go an awful long way in troubleshooting a lot of our problems, and just listen for things that might be abnormal and then do a little bit more investigation on why that might be. Because as I mentioned earlier, I think we often like to look at computer screens, but oftentimes that's much more reactive than being proactive and just being aware of your environment at all times. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
We are here to honor a man who has dedicated a substantial portion of his life to American agriculture.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack talking on Wednesday about this man.
What we're about are farmers and ranchers, the rural economy, quality of life in rural areas.
Bob Stallman, who is retiring as president of the American Farm Bureau Federation after 16 years in that presidential office, 22 years in a Farm Bureau leadership position. He's also been 40 years as a Texas rice and cattle producer. At a special ceremony Wednesday here at the USDA headquarters in Washington, Secretary Vilsack read this proclamation.
I, Thomas J. Vilsack, Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture, do hereby proclaim January 6, 2016 as Bob Stallman Appreciation Day. Bob, thank you very much for all that you have meant to American farmers and ranchers.
Vilsack crediting Stallman with playing a pivotal role in such things as getting the Farm Bill passed, boosting ag exports, getting vital information out to producers during last year's avian flu outbreak. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Teat dipping is important to prevent infection all year round, but complications can arise during the winter. Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares some tips on how to ensure proper disinfection without causing harm.
Well, I think winter is finally going to come. It took forever, I'm sure, for the people that like to ride snowmobiles. It's been kind of a long time a coming, but it looks like we're getting a little bit of snow now, and maybe it's going to stay with a little bit cooler weather. I heard last week that December was what expected to be the warmest on record since 1913, so it was really surely nice when it lasted. But with winter coming, I always get a couple of questions on kind of winter teat dipping and what people should do. Usually when you get these really cold streaks, but just as a reminder, there's some things that some principles we need to follow. First of all, particularly if you have any contagious kind of organisms, you surely do not want to quit teat dipping. But some of the things you need to do is use the same principle to use really good germicide skin conditioning dips. There are some really good winter dips out there. I would suspect most people have probably switched to those if you're in a cold freestall barn already. They are fairly expensive. I think maybe, I don't know what the best time to switch is, but I think a lot of producers are maybe going to switch about December 1st or so when the weather starts getting cold. Some people switch to a barrier dip. That typically is not recommended, partly because they take so long to dry. I think a lot of people seem to think that because they're a barrier dip, they provide almost like a glove on the cow's teats, but that's not really the situation. One thing you should do when the weather gets really cold, if your cows are going out to a cold environment or walking with a breezeway, when you dip them, make sure that you blot that drop of dip off the end of the teat as they walk out, because that's really where your issue is, where you're gonna have some freeze. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of companies that make excellent winter dips right now. They tend to be fairly expensive, but I don't think we need to think about the cost. I think find one that really keeps your teats in good condition so they don't chap or anything like that, and you'll be in good shape. Salves are not a good choice. Again, they tend to be, number one, they're not typically a very good germicide. They tend to attract a lot of dirt. So I would just encourage people to use a really good winter teat dip if you can. The other thing that I see as I get on farms is the farms that continue to have problems with frozen teats have really wet stalls. Their cows might be leaking. They might not use as much bedding. So I don't think it's when they're leaving the milking parlor that they're getting frozen. It's probably when they're laying in the stalls and their teats are in some liquid, or whether it's milk, whether it's some kind of urine or something like that. So I would strongly encourage you to step up your bedding practices now in the winter as we get cold weather, because I think that'll really help out more than you might imagine. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
How much effect have the recent floods and such had on corn prices?
Well, obviously, when you have these flooding issues, you have some isolated problems where people have to get grain to higher ground, some dislocation, some transportation shifts that have to occur to make things work.
And Agriculture Department grains analyst Jerry Norton says the disruptions may have caused corn prices to rise a bit in some local affected areas, but
it's not having a very significant impact on the price level generally. I mean, we continue to see prices weaken, which is a little disconcerting for producers out there.
Yes, normally you'd get a harvest low put into the price in early to mid-October, with prices starting to rise from winter to spring. Not this season.
Futures prices continue to be weak. Farmer selling has been tight, helped support the cash price and the basis levels, which has been good, but we're doing that against an ever-declining futures market at this point because of weakness in our export demand.
Brought on by
a lot of grain in the world, and we're fighting a lot of competition from South America in that market.
And then there's that strong U.S. dollar.
Well, that's not a help either.
No, and so for corn growers right now,
it's not a very optimistic picture.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.